Hi, my name is Stacy Brown, and I'll be your instructor for the next 2 hours. I'm a Microsoft Professional in Dynamics GP, and I've worked for Brittenford Systems for 7 years now. I perform tasks related to installations, implementations, upgrades, and support for GP and related third-party products. To ask questions, please enter the question in the questions window in the GoToWebinar control panel and click Send. As I finish each section, I'll answer any questions that were submitted to me. If the view on your screen is too small, you can click on the Zoom button in the top left corner. This will give you options to further zoom into the window or click on the full screen. If you're on full screen and have a question, there is an orange arrow usually in the top right corner. Click on the arrow and the control panel will be expanded for you to enter your question. During today's webinar, we'll learn to set up receivables, create customer classes, add and edit customers, create batches, we'll enter sales invoices, debit memos, and credit memos, we'll enter cash receipts, apply payments and prepayments, and perform key inquiries, as well as print key receivable management reports. So let's begin. The first thing I like to go over is how the system works, okay? So in this yellow box here, we have the System Manager. You can see up at the top, we have our distribution modules, purchase order processing, inventory, and sales order. Next, we have our submodules, payables management, fixed assets, bank reconciliation, and receivables management. And at the very bottom of our inverted pyramid, we have the general ledger. Please note that we are working on receivables management, which is the blue highlighted box here today. You'll notice that it updates the general ledger and it updates the bank reconciliation. So remember, whenever you're dealing with a receivables management account, you're going to want to enter it in our receivables management module, not directly into the general ledger, because the general ledger doesn't update receivables management. Now that we've gone over our system and how the data flows in GP, let's look at the sales setup window. When you first log into GP, you're on your home page. And there's two ways you can navigate through GP. You can use these buttons up here at the top. You know, if you want to enter an invoice, you simply go to Transactions, Sales. If you want to view inquiries or reports, you do the same thing, as well as for cards. What I like to do, and what I think is an easier navigation, is to come down here to the bottom left and click on Sales. This allows all the sales windows that you have access to be available to you in a one-click scenario. So right now, I'm going to expand the setup window right here by clicking on the box with the 4 arrows. All right, so this is my setup window, and then I'm going to go to Receivables to set up receivables. I like to go over this screen because it kind of explains to you how your system works when you're posting receivables transactions and applying documents. So first we have our aging periods. Here we can either age by due date or we can age by document date. You have 7 buckets that are available, 6 of them which are customizable. All right. You can change the current row. You can't change where it starts from, but you can change the end time. All right. So what does the aging really do? So when we run the aging process in sales, how is either picking due date or document date going to affect our invoices? So here I have a little example. As my presentation uploads, we have an aging by document date and an aging by due date column. In both columns, you'll see an invoice for $100 with an invoice date of January 15th, 2017, and a due date of February 15th, 2017. Now what you'll notice is that if we age by document date, when we run aging, if the aging was on February 28th, the invoice would be 44 days old because we're talking from January 15th to February 28th. Where for aging by due date, the document is only 13 days past due because we're comparing February 15th to February 28th. So let's go back to our setup window. The next thing we have are options. We have track discounts available in the general ledger. This is going to allow us to record discounts available to our customers and the discounts taken from our customers. Then we have print historical age trial balance. You'll always want this option checked because if you ever want to print a historical trial balance for a date in a prior period or not today's date, then you'll want to print that historical age trial balance. The next box is delete unposted printed documents. I have some clients who have this box checked and some clients who don't. It's really a preference of the organization. Just remember, once you print a receivables invoice, if you have this box unchecked, you'll have to post that invoice and then void it instead of just deleting it. The next box deals with compounding finance charges. And really, if you have this box checked, it just means you add the finance charges to the account balance of your customer so that when you apply finance charges again, it applies to the whole amount, including that previous finance charge. If you're tracking commissions, you'll want to pay attention to pay commissions after invoice is paid. Otherwise, you could see that the commissions can be paid prior to the invoice. The commissions in receivables is information only. The next one is reprint statements. You'll want reprint statements checked so that when customers call and say, I never received a statement, you'll be able to reprint those statements for your customers. Print tax details on documents and print dual currencies. That's if you have multi-currency. These all deal with if you track taxes within your system. You have auto-apply to finance charges first. That means when you click the auto-apply button in the applies window, are we going to apply the amount received first to finance charges and then to the invoices that are still open to be paid? Next is age unapplied credit amounts. So if you have a prepayment or a credit memo that hasn't applied to a document yet, do you want those documents to progress through your aging, or do you want them to stay in your current column? Over here in the top right corner, you have passwords. We have these passwords are system or receivables wide. So if Jane knows the password and Sue know the password, they both can overwrite any of these scenarios. So if a customer exceeds credit limit, Jane and Sue can vote and know the password, then Jane and Sue can overwrite the credit limit. You cannot have user-specific passwords for these tasks. It's one password for everyone. We have remove customer hold, exceed maximum write-offs, and waive finance charges. The next little box is apply by. So do you want to apply by due date or by document number, right? And then you have lastly your defaults here. So what is your default NSF charge? So when we go to apply NSF charges, which will be covered in the advanced class, how much will default into the window? The checkbook ID is going to be what defaults on the batches. Your price level. The document format, this is going to be for your invoices, so blank paper, user-defined 1 or user-defined 2. And then lastly, default summary view. I'm not a big fan of the amount since last close view, only because most of my clients don't come in January 1 or the first day of their fiscal year and close sales. They always wait a couple months before they actually close the previous year. So amount since last close would actually be, if they close in last day of December, would really be March 1st. Okay, so I always use either fiscal year if it's not a January to December, or I'll do calendar year, just depending on the situation. So I'm going to change that right now to fiscal year. All right, now we have two buttons. We have options and classes. Let's review options first. The Receivable Setup Options window at the top half here has all of your document types within receivables. So we have sales or invoices, scheduled payments, debit memos, write-off debit memos, finance charges, service or repairs, warranties, credit memos, you write off a credit memo, returns, and cash receipts. Here's the description of the document types, the codes that will be applied, and then your next number. The next number will always increase by 1 as you post transactions or create and save transactions. Next on the bottom left here we have date of last, and this is informational only, and it just kind of gives you an oversight of when the last time a finance charge was applied or run, statements were printed, the balance forward accounts were aged, the open item accounts were aged, and then lastly, paid transaction removal process. Now remember, in receivables, your documents don't move to history until you run that paid transaction removal process. Over here, if we're calculating and maintaining taxes within our system, you have sales, freight, and miscellaneous. These are defaults. At the bottom here, we have customer master, user defined 1, and user defined 2. These will show up in the customer maintenance card and allow you to track additional information per your customers. And then over here, new in GP 2013, we have user-defined fields for your customer address. And this allows you to track additional information for specific address IDs for your customers. Then lastly, we have sales history includes. I always check all the boxes because in my view, space is cheap and the data that you enter in GP usually doesn't increase a lot of the space that's for your databases. So it's better to maintain history for everything than have a summary view into history. All right, and how you see things, we'll start my presentation over again here. It seems to have frozen. Let's see if we have it. All right, so what we want to look at here is options selected. All right, so we have sales, discounts, freight, miscellaneous, and tax. Say we enter a transaction. The sale is $100. We have a miscellaneous charge of $50, and tax is maintained in our system, so we have $5 tax. So the total invoice is $155. When these documents move to history, what do you want to maintain? Here we're saying we only want to maintain sales and miscellaneous. So on the customer summary card, you'll see a sale of $150. It won't be recording the tax. But like I said, I like to maintain all history, so I check everything. Next is classes. All right, customer classes are created to increase data entry when creating customers. It allows you to update a large group of customers easy and quickly, as well as it allows you to maintain and group customers in classes. So we have the class ID of USA, Illinois, and Missouri T1. You can see the box here that's checked is default. That means as we create new customer classes, the information provided below it will automatically default for us as the values. So for example, let's set one up for Maryland. Here you can see that description is Illinois and Missouri customers. So we're going to change that to MD customers. You have your balance type, open item, and balance forward. So open item is are going to be where you are specific to invoices. Clients are paying specific invoices when they send you checks. So when you receive cash receipts, you're applying them to specific invoices. Balance forward customers are more like your relationship with your credit card, okay? When you get your credit card invoice, it shows you all your purchases, but it says, hey, here's your balance. You owe us this much money. They don't care what you're paying specific to that statement, but you better pay that balance. We have the finance charge, none, a percent or amount. Here we have a percent of 1.5. We have minimum payment. Just like your credit card, you always have like minimum percent of balance due. So we have no minimum, a percent, or an amount. Credit limit, no credit, unlimited, or an amount. So how much can the customer purchase from you? Write-off, not allowed, unlimited, or maximum. So here we have a maximum write-off of $25. Below it, you'll see your revalue customer. This is for multi-currency users only, and you're telling the system where to post your results to for revaluation. Do you want it to your receivables discount account or a sales offset account? If you're using the distribution module, you can use order fulfillment shortage default. And you'll need to tell it none, back order remaining, or cancel remaining. If your client or customer has been loyal to you and you provide them a trade discount, that means every time they purchase something from your company, you give them a 5% discount, say. So you would enter that percent amount here. You have your payment terms, which can be set up and variable per system. Here we have net 30, but you can see you can do 2%, 10, net 30 isn't a good example, or 13%, 15 on the 15th, net 30. You have your discount grace period and your due date grace period. If you're tracking commissions, you'll have salesperson ID and territory ID. When you're using the sales, the commission, if you're tracking commissions, you have to have at least one salesperson and one territory set up. You then have your shipping method, how you ship your product to your customers, your tax schedule ID, your price level, your currency ID if you're using multi-currency, as well as rate type ID if you're using multi-currency. Then the next two things are priority and statement cycle. Priority just gives you the ability to identify which customers are more important to you than others. And then your statement cycle tells you, okay, how often do we run statements for this, these customers? Do we do it no statement, a weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, monthly, bi-monthly, and quarterly? And then lastly, we have maintain history, and we'll want to make sure all those boxes are checked. Here, depending on your system, you can either see one button or two. If you have the project module installed, here you'll have the ability to set up your project information, which we won't go over today in this class. And then you'll always see this accounts button. Let's click on the accounts button. This customer class account setup only defaults the information to the customer account setup. It does not, the system never looks at the customer class account setup to pull accounts, okay? The system always looks at either the customer card or the posting account setup window. Okay, so here we have our checkbook ID, what checkbook ID is associated to this customer. We have our cash account from checkbook or customer. I always do checkbook. Here, it's really important that if you use the bank reconciliation module, you always check checkbook. You do not want to select customer if you use the bank reconciliation module. And then we have our typical sales defaults. We have accounts receivable account, the sales account, our cost of sales, inventory, terms, discounts taken, terms, discounts available, finance charges, write-offs, overpayment write-offs, and sales order returns. Remember, the more data you enter here, the less data the data entry has to do when they're entering in invoices and cash receipts. So we click OK. And then we're going to click on Save to save this class. Remember, if you want to make mass changes to a customer, you simply enter a class of customers. You can simply pick the class and say we want to change the finance charge percent to 2.5%. When we click on Save, it'll ask us, do we want to roll these changes to the customers in this class? What does this mean? If we click Yes, every customer associated with this class will be updated with the default set in that window. It will not just open up finance charges, update finance charges, which is what I changed. It'll update every single field listed here in the customer class. If I say no, it won't update any of the current customers set up, but any new customers set up with that class will have the new change. All right, so I'm going to say no and close. We'll close this window. So that is the receivables management setup and creating customer classes. Does anybody have any questions? Wait a few minutes so if people are typing, they'll be able. All right, no questions, so we'll move on. Let's talk about adding and editing customers. So I'm going to minimize the setup window. So I'll bring all of my drop-downs you'll see are related to these up here to the window, and then I can expand cards. So I'm going to go to Sales, Cards, and then Customer. To review customers, I'm just going to select an existing customer. So we have our customer ID. Usually people have an acronym that they use for customers. So, they'll use like the first 6 digits of the customer, the first 3 digits of the customer, then maybe, some serial number back behind it to identify that customer. You'll notice that once we tab off the customer ID that it grays out, which means we can no longer edit the customer ID. We have name, short name, and statement. All right. Short name is just used when entering an invoice. You can use the short name as a quick lookup. Statement name is going to be the name that actually prints on the statements that you send to your customers. You have your address ID. The address that appears here in the customer card is going to be the primary address for this client or customer. So you'll see we have primary, and then it shows the information: contact, address, city, state, zip, country code, and country. Over here we have our class ID. If you select a class ID for a customer, the information that we identified in the customer class will default for us here, and I'll point those out as we get to them. You'll also notice we have the hold, inactive, and parent customer ID. The hold button here means that if you put a customer on hold, the customer, you can no longer enter invoices for that customer. Okay? If you check box inactive, you no longer can enter invoices for that customer either, which means that you have inactive is more like you no longer have a relationship with that customer. And then the parent customer ID is if you use national accounts. We won't go over that today, but national accounts allow you to create a relationship between customers if they have a parent-child relationship. After class ID, we have priority. This will default from your customer class if you set it up, or you can change it as you're creating the customer. So this just allows you to pick a priority for the customer, and then based on those priorities, you can then print reports and do some filtering on customers. We have phone 1, 2, 3, and fax. Those are included on the address card. Your UPS zone is used when deciding whether you can overnight to a customer or not. Shipping method, tax schedule ID, if you're using the taxes. You have this button, ship complete documents. At the bottom here, you have defaults for entering your invoices. So you have a default of ship to, so you're going to be shipping to their warehouse, bill to, statement to. You have, if you're tracking commissions, salesperson ID and territory ID. And then you'll notice here at the bottom, we have user-defined 1, which was identified in the accounts receivable setup window as type, and then user-defined 2. Over here, we have comment 1 and comment 2. That's just general information about the customer, like always pays 10 days late, or excellent customer, always pays 15 days early. We have our trade discount, which will default from our customer class if we identify a class, as well as for payment terms, discount grace period, due date grace period, and price level. All right, so let's look at accounts. Because we selected a class ID, it defaulted our accounts for us from the customer class window. Now you might be asking, when should I enter accounts here instead of the posting account setup window? My theory is if you have a specific accounts receivables account or a specific account that's always used no matter what, I always set that up in the posting account setup window. That way, if you forget to add it to a class or you forget to add it to a customer, then you don't have to worry about it coming up blank while a user is entering an invoice or a cash receipt, all right, or a credit memo or a debit memo. So if you have one accounts receivables account, I might consider putting that in the posting account setup window instead of the customer account maintenance window. If you enter it in both, it doesn't really matter. The system always looks at the customer account maintenance window, and if an account's not there, it goes to the posting account setup window, to the pooling account. If the account's not there, then it's blank when you look at the distributions of the transaction. We then have address. You can have an unlimited number of addresses per customer. So if you have one customer and they have 6 or 7 locations, you do not need to create 7 different customers. You can just create 7 different addresses. You'll notice in this window that when we tabbed off, you have your customer ID and your address ID are grayed out. So that means that once we click save, we can no longer edit the address ID and the customer ID. So you have your contact, your address, city, state, zip code, country, UPS zone, shipping method, tax schedule ID, site ID. So if you're pulling the inventory from a specific site, you'd identify the site there. Salesperson ID, territory ID. You'll notice this, remember, is new in GP 2013. You have user-defined 1 and user-defined 2 for your address card. And then your ship to information, so address, name, and then do you want to print phone or fax number. And here again, you have additional phone numbers for your address card. If you're using the EFT module, here you can enter the EFT bank information for your customer. So I'm going to save and close that window. The next window is Options. Here under Options, a lot of the information will default from the customer class if you set a customer class up. So we have Balance Type is an open item or balance forward. And most of my clients who use the Receivables Management module use open item. We have Finance Charge, none, percent, or an amount. Minimum payment, no minimum, percent, or amount. Credit limit, so no credit limit, unlimited credit, or a specific amount. So here we can see that Aaron Fitz has a $35,000 limit. We have maximum write-off, so not allowed, unlimited maximum. We have the fields that are related to multi-currency, so we have revalue customer. Once we revalue that customer, where's the difference posted to? Is it our receivables or discount account, or is it our sales offset account? If we're using the distribution modules, we have our order fulfillment shortage default. How do we handle that? Here is where you'd identify if the customer uses a credit card with you, what the credit card ID and credit card number are, the expiration date of that credit card, their bank name and bank branch. If they have a specific language, you can identify that as well. Over here on the right, if they're tax exempt, you'll want to make sure you get their taxes and codes, and then enter their tax registration information. And once again, if you use multi-currency, you have your currency ID, rate type ID. And then you have your statement cycle. On the bottom portion of the customer maintenance options, you have the maintain history, and remember you want all of those checked all the time. And then if you have the email functionality set up within GP, you can send your email statements, all right? So you don't have to send them via paper. And what that does is it interfaces with the MAPI compliant email that you have loaded on your workstation to send out the statements to their customers. You have email if you're using email functionality, and then project. So I'm going to click Save here. Next I want to discuss to you is the fact that you, during your relationship with a customer, might need to change things. Credit limits, they might move their offices, they might, your relationship might change, their payment terms might change. You can change all of that information for a customer at any time. The only thing you can never change is the customer ID. All right, once a customer is created and a transaction is applied, you no longer can delete that customer either. As long as there's a transaction in open, transaction in work, transaction in history, you can no longer delete that customer. Okay? If you want to remove the customer from a lookup screen as you're entering invoices and such, you can click Inactive. That will remove the customer from the lookup screen. New with 2013, they came out with a utility that allows you, or put the utility that Microsoft usually had in a separate program into the utilities within GP 2013. And this was after Service Pack 2, so you need GP 2013 and Service Pack 2 to have this utility. But here we have the customer combiner and modifier. So if we want to modify a customer, we can just click on Customer Modifier. We can select the customer. So here, let's change this Aaron Fit. And we're going to change them to have 3 zeros like the rest of the customers. And then you just click Process. With this import utility, you can also do an import file. So it's really in the import file, all you're designating is the source customer ID and the destination customer ID. If you're in a version prior to GP 2013 Service Pack 2, you have availability to this utility too, but it's not within GP out of the box. You'll need to download a product called Professional Services Tools Library. You'll need to contact your partner. The partner can download it for you and send it to you. or even install it for you. Okay, so let's click process here. And this is just warning you that before you make any changes, you may want to back up your database just in case you make a mistake. But I didn't make any mistakes right here, so I'm just going to click on continue. My suggestion to clients who don't have a IT staff on site all the time is to do these processes like customer, combiner, and modifier first thing in the morning, because usually, and I'm saying usually because things have to be set up correctly, but usually people will have maintenance plans that run in the middle of the night. So usually when I set up database backups for customers, our clients, they run at like 12 midnight, right, when nobody's in the system. So if somebody comes in first thing in the morning, tells the staff to stay out of GP, and runs this customer combiner, if there are mistakes, we can always revert to last night's backup without losing any data. So you can just see here, my modifier report just says, here was the customer ID, now it has 3 zeros in my destination. So when I go back to the customer card, so we'll go to cards, we'll go to customer. When I pull up on the lookup screen, you'll notice that Aaron Fit now has 3 zeros. And what the customer combiner utility does is with the combiner, when you're moving two customers together, it's creating, if the customer doesn't exist, it's creating the customer and then changing all the transactions in the history to point to that customer. If you're using modifier, customer modifier, it just changes the ID in the back end for you. All right, any questions about customers adding an edit? Someone says, can you go over the customer combiner again? I don't see it on my GP software. Like I said, GP 2013 Service Pack 2 has a utility already in the dexterity codes or in the code of GP, so you see it out of the box under utilities. Of course, if you have security activated, you'll probably need security access to the utility. But if you're in a version of GP that is less than Service Pack 2 of GP 2013, so if you're in GP 10, 2010, or even 2013 up to Service Pack 2, you'll need to install a free software, professional service tools library. Like I said, you have to contact your partner. They can download and install it for you. Right. And then here, this is where you would choose the customer combiner and modifier. If you're combining, so if you have one, say you created 7 customers because you had 7 addresses because you didn't know that you could create multiple addresses. You can combine all that so that when you're trying to pull analysis reports for that customer, you're not pulling information from 7 customers. And then when you're entering cash receipts, you have to remember which one it came from and which ones it's paying. Everything can be together in one customer card. And then your customer modifier, that's just changing the ID from one ID, the source ID, to the destination, which would be your new customer ID. Once it's listed here below, you just click on process and it processes the customer information change for you. All right, let's talk about entering sales information. So sales transactions, debit memos, credit memos, and cash receipts. When you're entering in sales transactions, there are 4 ways you can post a transaction. You have your transaction level posting, which means while you're entering it, you're clicking the post button. Transaction level posting does not allow you to save and review the transaction. You have to post it immediately. You have batch posting, which means that you click go into receivables batches, you post 1 batch at a time, right? You have series post, which allows you to post any batches in the receivables management module at the same time. So say you have 5 batches, you've reviewed the edit lists that were sent to you or given to you by your coworkers or employees, and you just need to go in there, check them off, and click post. You can use your series post. If you're a small organization and you have your posting responsibilities across all modules, you can use the master posting module, which is found under GP, Tools, Routines, Master Posting. And this screen is going to allow you to post across your system. So you're going to see financial transactions, your GL transactions, your payables transactions, and your sales transactions all in batches, all in one window where you can check off the boxes and click post. All right. So let's expand this transactions window. You'll notice you may see more windows on my screen than you do when you log into GP on your screen. That's because I have on my system sales order processing, invoicing, and receivables management. Up at the top here, you see your sales order processing. All right, so that's going to allow you to enter quotes, orders, invoices. It interacts with the inventory module. You have your invoice entry module, which you can enter invoices, and it also interacts with your inventory module. And then lastly, below this line is what we're going to be focusing on today, which is receivables management. And that in itself only allows you to do invoicing, credit memos, debit memos, finance charges, service and repairs, warranties, cash receipts. It doesn't allow you to pull from an inventory list, is the major thing with receivables management. You're just saying, here's your invoice, this is the total for receivables management. So let's create our receivables batch. So here we can enter our batch ID. Here I would say use an acronym too. It allows you that, I've been getting a lot of calls where people were printing to the wrong printer, or the posting hung up and they couldn't print it and they needed to reprint their posting journals. It's a lot easier when you have to reprint those posting journals to have a batch ID that you know is your batch ID, okay? So I usually say come up with an acronym. I usually do my initials first and then the day's date. So I'm going to do 09/2013. The next field is origin. Is this a transaction entry? So is it an invoice, credit memo, debit memo, service or warranty, finance charge, etc.? Or is this a cash receipt entry where you're receiving payment from a customer? You have your comment, which is your batch comment, generic information about the batch that contains the transactions if you're grouping transactions specifically for a reason. You have your frequency. Here I have single use. If I were to choose one of the reoccurring transaction types, so we'll pick monthly right now, I can say, okay, the posting date is 4/12/2017 of this batch. If I pick monthly, once I post this batch, the batch will reappear in the system or stay appeared in the system, but the new posting date will be 5/12/2017, all right? If you have a reoccurring posting and it says 0, that means you have unlimited postings of that batch. It'll always be out in your system for you to post, all right? A lot of people I see will do a certain amount. An example I always give is really for the payables management module, and that's rent. Say you have to pay rent on a location. I always set up the invoice entry for payables to have a reoccurring posting of 12. So once the year is done, once my rent lease is up, then I have to enter a new batch for that rent. If you select miscellaneous here, you'll also have available the days to increment. So if you have an odd number of days that you need to increment a batch, you can enter the days there. So if you have 15, say 12 or 28 or such, you can enter those days there. And it'll increment the posting date by that amount of days. So I'm just going to select single use. We have checkbook ID, so that's going to be the default checkbook that's associated with the invoices. Currency ID, if you have multi-currency. Here, your times posted and your last date posted deal with reoccurring batches, and it just tells you, okay, you've posted this transaction 10 times, and that will show in your times posted. And then the last date posted was the date it was posted. So if we posted this batch and made it reoccurring, times posted would be 1, and the last date posted would be 4/12/2017. The next fields you have are transaction control, batch total control, both have actuals as well. I have some customers who use this as a control when they're that it forces them to review the batch, tell them how many transactions are in the batch, what's the batch total, and make it tie. I've seen customers who take the lazy way out. That's supposed to be a control, but since actuals always show, they just type in the actuals that are in there and click post. If you have the approval process set up in your posting setup, the approved box will become available. You simply check the box, enter in the password for the batch. The password is specific to this window in Receivables Management. It does not change per person. Everybody has the same password, kind of like those passwords that we reviewed on the Receivables Management setup window. What I do like about this is that it does track who entered the password and what day they approved it. And you'll see that here under user ID and approval date. On these buttons up here, do you want to save the batch? Clear just clears the window for you to create another batch. Delete, so way if you say you accidentally, unfortunately, entered 20 duplicate invoices that you forgot you did last night before you left, you can click the delete button, and then you have the post button when you're ready to post the batch. The printer icon up here in the top right, that's for printing your edit list, allows you to review the account transactions prior to posting the batch. If you are setting up or you're about to enter transactions, there's two ways you can get to the transaction entry screen. You either can click on the transactions button, and based on your origin here, it'll either send you to the transaction entry window, or if you selected cash receipts, it'll take you to the cash receipts window. Or you can click save, and then over here, you can go to transactions and then transaction entry. Does anybody have questions about creating batches? I'll give people a few minutes. All right, let's just give some people some time if they need to enter any questions. Just wait a few more minutes. All right, so we're going to move on to entering in sales invoices, debit memos, and credit memos. So again, we're going to go to sales, we're going to go to transactions, and then we're going to go to transaction entry. All right. So here we have our document type. So this is where we're going to choose whether it's going to be an invoice, a debit memo, a finance charge, it's service or repair, a warranty, a credit memo, or a return. All right, so we'll just discuss sales invoices. See, the sales number automatically defaults for you. As you enter and save, transactions, the sales number will increase by 1. You enter your description of the sale, so phone system. You enter or you select the batch ID simply by clicking on the magnifying glass. Your document date will default to the date you have in the bottom left corner here. You select your customer ID, so I'm going to select that new Aaron Fit ID that we set up or modified. You'll notice the information in this middle section defaults for you from the customer card. So we have our address ID as primary. We don't have a salesperson associated or a territory associated to this customer, but if we did and we tracked commissions, our commission information would update. If you're using multi-currency, your currency ID will be selected and you can modify it. You have payment terms, shipping method, tax schedule ID. If there's a PO number that your customer sent to you that they'd like to be tracked, you can always enter the PO number here in the PO number field. You have your cost of the sale, so if you're tracking your cost of goods sold, you can put in, this cost us $500. You can say we sold it for $1,500. If the customer automatically has a transaction discount, it'll default for you. As you tab, once you get to taxes, if a tax schedule is identified, the system will calculate the tax for you. If you are invoicing and you've already received cash payment, but you are credit card or check, if you've received any type of payment prior to entering the invoice and you haven't already entered that payment, you can do so by entering it here. So we'll just leave ours on account, and you can see here $1,605 because it includes the $105 of taxes. And then if they paid and they had a terms discount, did they take the terms discount? You'll notice the apply button is unavailable because we're entering in an invoice. So we have 2 buttons. We have distributions and commissions. The commissions window, if we open it up, allows you to identify or modify somebody's commission. So if a salesperson is identified with the customer, they'll be identified here in the commissions entry window with the default commission percent that they get. If the commission percent for this invoice changes, say you're running some special where you're trying to get your salespeople motivated and they get, say, 8% instead of 5% or 10% because of 5% instead of 5%, you can change that commission percent on the invoice entry. Right? Then we have our distributions button. Here we have our distributions. You'll notice we have, if we scroll over here, we can compare our information here to the information we have over here. We have our cost of goods sold for $500. That's related to the cost field here for $500. We have our inventory, for $500. That's dealing with our cost again. We have our sales, which relates to the sales field here for $1,500. Now the tax schedule that we have associated to this invoice identifies 2 tax accounts and probably has multiple tax rates associated to it. So we have our taxes here for 90 and 15, which is a total of 105. And then we have our receivables of 1,605. All right, which we'll notice here is the on-account amount. You'll need to remember that these amounts need to balance to the fields associated to it in the invoice entry window, or your transaction will go to batch recovery until those distributions are corrected. If you modify or need to add lines, you can do so down here. You can modify the accounts up to posting. You can say you open this window and then made a change. You'll notice our account amounts did not change. So we'll need to click on the default button again. If you've already entered a lot, you don't have to click the default to update it. You just need to make sure you update the amounts for the accounts. But I'm going to click default here. And you can see it changes to the $2,212. You can delete the whole distribution as it is by clicking on delete, and then you can re-enter the transactions as you'd like as well, the distributions. So we'll click OK here. And then because we have a patch ID associated to the transaction, we can't do transaction level posting, so the post button will warn us if we click post. We still have the opportunity to delete the batch, or the transaction, excuse me, because we haven't printed the invoice. We can click save to save the transaction for batch approval. And then here we have the print button. The print button prints the invoice for the customer, okay? Remember, in our receivables management module, we had the delete unposted printed documents unchecked. All right, so once we click this print button, we no longer have the ability to delete the transaction. We'd have to post and void that transaction. If we went back to our receivables management module and said checked delete unposted printed documents, then we still have the ability to delete. And then lastly, we have this printer icon here, and that does not print the invoice, it prints an edit list for the batch. Okay, remember this printer icon, if you click on it without having a batch ID associated here, it'll tell you you can't print an edit list. So this printer icon prints the edit list, this print button prints the invoice. So we're going to click save. All right. The next document that I want to review with you guys is debit memos. All right, so we're going to be in the same window. You get here the same way. You go to Sales, Transaction Entry. You're going to select on the document type a debit memo. So this is going to increase your customer balance. You'll notice the debit number defaults automatically for us. You have your batch ID and document date. Just like you had it before, you identify your customer and bits. This information in the middle is the same, defaults for us. And then we have our costs, our debit amount. So I'm going to say we're going to debit them $50. And I think the description for our invoice should be incorrect. Modifying invoice for missing, or a modifying incorrect invoice. All right. So you could enter a debit memo, say if you billed them $1,500, but you were supposed to bill them $1,550. All right. You can still enter the payment information here if they applied payment and you haven't entered that information into GP yet. If they've taken a terms discount, you can enter that information here. We're going to have it on account. And then if we simply look at our distributions, you'll notice here that we have our debit memo for $50 and then our debit to receivables for $50. And then we have the same options up here for our debit memo, but we're going to click on Save to save this document. And then the last thing that we're going to look at in this window is credit memos. So once again, to enter a credit memo, you're going to come to the same window. So you're going to go to Sales, Transactions, Transaction Entry. In the document memo, you're going to select credit memo. You can enter in a description. Item was slightly damaged. All right, so you can apply credit memos to customers, invoices. So here we select the customer. Their information in the middle, again, defaults. If you need to associate a PO number to this credit memo, you can do so. You can enter in the credit amount. Say we're going to credit them $250. And if a discount was returned, then you can enter in the discount returned amount. You'll notice that the apply window becomes available. This button will be available for credit memos and returns. All right. So let's look at the apply window. We're going to minimize it so it's a little bit easier to see. All right. You'll notice here, these are all transactions that have been posted. So the invoice and the debit memo that we entered earlier aren't showing up in the list because they haven't been posted yet. All right. Here's your opportunity to apply a credit memo to your invoices that are outstanding. So we can check the box. There's a couple options. We can check the box, right, and it'll apply the amount associated. At this time, we could change the amount that you want to apply to the specific window. We can change the terms taken at this time, and we can create any write-offs that we need right now. So if we wanted to do a $50 write-off on this invoice, we could do so here. You'll notice when I tabbed off the write-off field that it's asking me for a password, and that's because we identified a password in the Receivables Management module. So the password is system-specific for this Receivables Management scenario. So I'm going to enter in the password, click OK, and that'll create my write-off for $50. Another way that we can apply a credit memo return is by clicking on the Auto Apply button. And this goes back to our Receivables Management module. So let's just take a quick look. Let's minimize this. We're going to go to Setup and then Receivables. And here we have that Apply By section, remember. And we either applied by due date or document date, right? Or document number, excuse me. So we, in our Receivables Management Setup window, apply by document number. So we're going to click OK here. And when we go back, we uncheck this box and click Auto Apply. You can see that it's auto applying by this document number, right? But if we had changed the Receivables Management Setup window to apply by due date, it's going to look at these fields here for each of the transactions. I'm going to minimize. I'm minimizing and expanding these 3 rows by these 2 buttons here, okay? So I'm going to minimize it for a quicker, easier view. So if we auto-applied by document or due date, excuse me, it would be looking at this field here to determine what transactions we would, or invoices we'd apply this credit memo to first. And it had actually applied to this invoice here of 7/12/2013. Right? So to expand it and to view the write-off field, the second row and this third row, you simply click on the expansion button here where it says Show Details. And then we're back to that maximized view. You'll also notice up here we have 2 fields, the original amount and the unapplied amount. This is important because here we have an original amount of $250. Now if your unapplied amount is $250, that means we didn't apply the credit memo to an invoice. But you'll notice that when I uncheck the invoice, it increases the unapplied amount to $250. So we could either apply the credit memo now, which we can do by just checking the box, or we can apply the document later. And that's all dependent on the unapplied amount here, whether it will be available later for you to apply against. So we're going to click OK. Right, which will bring us back to the Receivables Transaction Enter window. And then the last thing we want to look at is our distributions, which is debiting credit memo account for $250, which they have as a revenue account, and then crediting our receivables account for $250. and then we'll click Save. Does anybody have any questions about entering sales invoices, debit memos, and credit memos? Give you guys a few minutes to type. All right, we have a question from Eric, and he says, can I delete an invoice? I can't seem to delete an invoice after it has been printed. And remember, that has to do with our Receivables setup window. So if we go to Setup and then Receivables, if you have this box, Delete Unposted Printed Documents, unchecked, that means that once you print the invoice for the customer, you then have to post and then void the transaction. You cannot delete the transaction once it's been printed. You come in here and you check this box in the Receivables Management Setup window, then the system doesn't care if you've printed the invoice. It'll allow you to delete it. All right, let's review some scenarios and create some invoices. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here. So our first scenario, Paul W. has sold his customer Greenway Foods an upgrade to their phone system. Here's the invoice to record the sale. The cost of the sale is $317.38, and the sales amount is $634.50. Paul's commission rate for the sale is 5%. So we're going to use a batch to record the transaction. All right. So we'll leave this up a little bit so we can kind of view what it says. Make it a little bit bigger here. And we'll zoom in a little bit so we can see what it says. And we'll go to transactions and then transaction entry. All right. Hopefully everybody can see the scenario here on my right of my screen. All right, so in the receivables transaction entry, we're going to enter in our receivables. So we're going to select sales invoices. We'll let our document number default for us. We'll enter in a description. So we're going to do upgrade to their phone system. We'll use the batch ID I created today. It doesn't identify a date, so we'll just leave the date as is. We'll select our customer, which is Greenway Foods. So I'm going to click on the little icon here. Select Greenway. You'll see that Paul defaults as the salesperson. It doesn't associate a PO number, so we won't worry about the PO number. It identifies a cost of the sale to be $317.38. The sale amount was $634.50. Keep tabbing off. Our tax is automatically calculated for us at $44.42. Now, we need to verify that Paul's commission rate is 5%. So we're going to click on the commissions button. And we'll see that Paul is the salesperson. And the commission percent is 3%. So we need to change that to 5%. Another thing that you'll need to pay attention to is what is the commission rate for? Is it for sales or the total invoice? Okay, and that's going to change depending on if you have freight, a trade discount, and miscellaneous. Okay, so here if we look at invoice total, that also includes tax. So you'll want to make sure that usually in commissions applied to, you're going to have just the sales amount. You'll notice down here you have the distributed percent, which is 100%. and then the total commission amount, which is $31.73. So we'll click OK. And then we'll review our distributions. So we have our cost of goods sold for $317.38. We have our inventory, which is decreased by $317.38. We have our total sale for $634.50. We have our tax expense and tax payable. We have two taxes here that are associated for a total of $44.42. And then we have our receivables line for $678.92. And then we have our commission expense and our commission payable for the 5% owed to Paul. So we'll click OK. And then it said to record this transaction to a batch, so we'll click Save. Now that we've created those invoices, let's post those invoices. So we're going to go to Transactions, and we're going to go to Receivables Batches. We're going to select the batch ID. We're going to select SDB09-2013. We're going to click Select. We can click on this little printer icon here in the top right. We're going to print the edit list to screen. You can print it to printer, file. I'm going to say screen. So I click OK. What I wanted to show you guys here is not only the edit list, which shows all the transactions we've entered today, as you can see here, that I've associated to this batch. But I wanted to show you the long-awaited for ability to change the print setup in GP 2013. So if you forget to change what printer it goes to, when you click on the print icon in the screen output, you can change it to whatever printer you want. Okay, I don't have a printer attached to my VM here, my virtual image, so you only see fax, an XPS document writer, and then OneNote. All right. So if you print it to screen and then decide you need to print it to a printer, but you didn't before identify the right printer, you no longer have to go back and start all over again. You can just click File and then Print Setup and change your printer. All right. So then we're going to close this window because we don't see any errors. Now, if we had an error to the batch, we'd see it up here at the top. And then if we had any errors per transaction, we'd see it here at the bottom per transaction. All right. Close that, and then we click Post. And then we can post the mini journals. I'm just going to do the sales entry posting journal for now. Oh, I clicked Cancel by OK. So we'll try a different one. You can print to screen, printer, or file. I'm going to click Cancel on this one, and on this one, and this one. We won't print any of the posting journals for now. We'll print another posting journal later. All right. So that printed our batch of invoices. So now let's do the scenario of a credit memo, okay? So let's go back to PowerPoint. So the credit memo scenario. After reviewing your customer's account, you realize that a pricing error has been made on an invoice. Since the invoice posted in the previous lab has not yet been paid, adjust the balance owed by issuing a credit memo for $38. This will effectively reduce the price invoiced for the item. Apply the credit memo to the original invoice and then print and post the credit memo. So we will do transaction level posting here. So we're going to go to Sales, Transaction Entry. Our document type is going to be credit memo. I'll bring up the scenario again here on the side so we can see it. We'll enter in a description, so we'll put pricing error. All right. Since we're doing transaction level posting, we won't identify a batch ID. We'll accept today's document date since the date wasn't identified in our scenario. Our customer for the previous invoice was Greenway, so we'll look up Greenway again. We'll tap through. Again, if a PO number was identified, we can associate the PO number here. We won't adjust costs. We're just adjusting the invoice amount, so we're going to enter $38 here. In the scenario, it talks about applying the credit memo to the previously posted invoice. So we're going to click on the apply button. We're going to do minimize it so we can see our transactions. And I believe the previous invoice was for $634, which I believe is this one here. And if you want to look at the document, you know, if it's in question, we can click on Apply Document. And here it shows us our invoice for $634.50. All right, so we know that that's the right transaction. And we did that by highlighting the invoice and then clicking on this Apply to Document. Remember, anything that is underlined, I want to say out of the box, blue and underlined, you can change those settings in your user preferences. So out of the box, if it's blue and underlined, that means it links to another window. Amount remaining goes to your applied from credits window. And then if you had terms taken and write-offs, you'd see those windows show up as well. So here we have the additional sales tax and write-off distributions. All right. So we'll check the invoice we created in the last scenario. We'll click OK. And then it says to print and post. So we'll click the print button. Here you'll notice my report type can be either standard or Word template. Word templates have to be deployed in your system for that to be available. So I'm just going to click standard, and then I'm going to click OK. And then here you see the credit memo for $38. All right. And now that we've printed it, we can post it. Remember, the only reason I can click the post button in this window is because a batch ID is not identified, and we're doing transaction level posting. So I'll click post here. When you're doing transaction level posting, the posting journals aren't going to print until I close the window. So I'm going to close the window. I'm going to print the sales entry posting journal, and then I'm going to click cancel on the detailed breakdown, the summary breakdown, and the checkbook posting journal. So here you can just see we entered a credit memo for $38. Here are the accounts that were affected by the transaction, and here's where it was applied to. See, we have our sales document for $38. All right, any questions about entering in sales invoices, debit memos, and credit memos? All right, let's move on. Let's enter in a cash receipt. Entering in a cash receipt is the same for entering a payment for an invoice that's already been entered, or if you're entering in a cash receipt for prepayment, okay? So we're going to go to sales, transaction, and then cash receipts. All right. Another way we could get here is if we created a receivables batch. So if, say I created SDB underscore cash receipts underscore today's date, 9/20/2013. Right? And I could say origin cash receipt, and then I could click on transaction and it opened the same window. All right. In the cash receipts window, you have your receipt number, which automatically increases by 1 every time you enter in a cash receipt. You have your batch ID, and the reason it automatically filled in for me is because I clicked the transaction button on the batch, receivables batch window. We have today's date, which defaults from the bottom left here, date. We select our customer. So I like Aaron Fitz, so I'm going to click Aaron. If you have multi-currency enabled, you can select the different currencies that maybe the cash receipt came in as. You have check, cash, credit card. If you're using EFT, you can mark EFT. We'll say we received a check. We'll say we received the check for $500. We were going to eventually deposit it into the Uptown Trust, so we'll leave that as the default checkbook ID, and then we need our check number, so 5689. And then if there's a comment that you need to associate to this cash receipt, you can do so here at the bottom. Then you click on Apply. If you're applying the cash receipt to an invoice that's already posted in your system, you can click on the Apply button and apply it as of right now. If this is a prepayment, obviously you won't have an invoice to apply it to, so you don't even need to go to the Apply window. And then you click on Distributions. And this just shows you that we're debiting our cash for $500 and we're crediting our receivables for $500. So we'll click OK here, and then we can click Post. All right. You have this Auto Apply button here on the top screen. That allows you to auto apply without even opening up the Applies window. You can delete the transaction at any time before posting, and then you also have the option to click Save if it's associated to a batch here. And then here in the top right, again, is your printer icon where you can print an edit list. So we'll click Save here. Any questions about entering in payments and prepayments? All right, the next thing I want to go over before we do our credit memo scenario, not credit memo scenario, excuse me, our cash receipt scenario is, okay, what if I did enter a prepayment? How do I then apply it to the invoice once I've created the invoice? I'm going to close this window. I'm going to go to Transactions and then Apply Sales Documents. You would select the customer. You would select the document. All right, so these are all your documents that you'll notice you won't want to select anything that has an amount remaining because of 0, because that means the documents have already been applied. So let's look at this return that they've entered. All right, so like before in the credit memo situation when we were looking at the Applies Documents window, it's the same for when you're entering in prepayments and then applying later. So you have your document number that we just selected. We have our apply date and our posting date, apply posting date, which is today's date. And then we have our original amount and our unapplied amount. So you can see that this return hasn't been applied at all. All right. Here you have your documents that you can apply to. So I'm going to minimize here their due dates, the amount remaining, and the applied amount. So here we can click Auto Apply. And what the system does is going to auto apply by, again, document number, because that's what we have set up in the Receivables Management module. And it's just going to go down the list until the unapplied amount is 0. So let's click Auto Apply. And you'll notice that it's paying 3 invoices. This invoice for $438.93, a sales invoice for $1,712, and then it's partially paying off invoice SLS 11012 for $417. So it just went down the list by document number and applied the original amount of the return. All right. Once you do that, you can click on OK, and that automatically applies this return to the invoices. All right, so let's look at another scenario. So we have our receivables cash receipt scenario. Hampton Village Eatery has sent you a payment for their phone system. The sale was invoiced on document SLS 114003. The check received was dated 3/15/2017 for the amount of $850. The check number is 458325. I'm going to go here to cash receipts. I'm going to select Hampton Village Eatery. I'll type in Hampton here and see if I can find it pretty quickly. Hampton Village Eatery. We received a check, so I'll leave that as is for the amount of $850 with a check number of 458325. Right, and this is on document 4, document SLS 114003. You can click on the apply. You'll notice that I've already applied this amount because the SLS 114003 has an amount remaining. Oh, I must have deleted it. So we have an amount remaining of $8,150. So we can click on this sales document. Our unapplied amount becomes 0. So we'll click OK. And then we'll click Post. Right? Remember, because we did transaction level posting, the posting journals won't print until we click the X button on the window. So I'll get the cash posting journal to window, and then I'll click cancel on the detail breakdown, the summary breakdown, and the checkbook. Let's look at that one as well, the checkbook posting journal. So here you can simply see, here's the receipt that we created for $8,150. Here's the distributions, cash and accounts receivable, and then we applied it to document SLS 114003 for $8,150. All right, and then once we close that window, our checkbook posting journal comes up, and you can see here we have our checkbook for Uptown Trust with a cash receipt. The number is 458325, which we deposited or we received. We haven't deposited yet. That's a separate step. Date, and then our original amount, and then if we had multi-currency, it would show us the functional amount. All right. Any questions about cash receipts? Laura asked, once I post a cash receipt, will the transaction automatically show in my bank reconciliation? The bank reconciliation module really isn't covered in this class, but there is an additional step that you must take to deposit for the check to show up in your bank reconciliation. That step needs to be done in the bank rec module. So pretty much what we told the system is, hey, we've received the check. It's on our desk. We've entered the cash receipt. The next step would be to take it to the bank and get a bank deposit slip. And you'd have to enter that bank deposit slip in GP for the bank reconciliation module to show the transaction. All right. And then the last scenario that I'd like to go over is just applying a payment to or an unapplied document to an invoice. So the scenario is after printing the unapplied documents report from Unified Wire and Cable Systems, you find that there's an unapplied document that needs to be applied before month end. The payment, PMT 118020, was originally entered as a prepayment. Apply the payment to invoice SLS 118010. So here let's create a little notepad. And in this scenario, we need to note that we are applying a document for Unified Wire and Cable Systems. We need to know that the payment number is PMT 118020, and the document we're applying it to is SLS 118010. All right, so we're going to go down to Sales, Transactions, and then Apply Sales Documents. I'm going to open up that window and then bring up my notepad. All right, so we're going to select Unified Wire and Cable. we're going to select the document PMT 118020, and I selected that document by clicking on the magnifying glass. We'll leave the apply date and the posting date as the date of our system since we didn't have one identified in our scenario. And then we're supposed to apply this payment to document SLS 118010. So I'm going to select this bottom invoice here. And then we'll click OK. And that applies our document. Does anybody have questions about applying a document after the payment has been posted and the invoice has been posted? The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about before we get into key inquiries and key reports is what happens when your transaction goes to batch recovery. Everybody's probably seen it. You see it if you have a power outage, your transaction has an error, it'll go to batch recovery. If your computer, for unfortunate reasons, crashes while you're in the middle of posting, those can all cause batches to go to batch recovery, all right? So to get to batch recovery, you can either go to administration here, that little computer icon in the bottom left, and you're going to go under routines and then batch recovery, or the way I see most of my clients go is by going to GP, Tools, Routines, and then Batch Recovery, right? When we open up the Batch Recovery, we'll see here we have an invoice, a sales document. The origin was a general entry, and the status was transaction error edit required. There are a few statuses that we need to look at, okay? Posting interrupted, which means it was interrupted during, the batch was interrupted during posting process. Printing interrupted, which means the batch was interrupted during the printing phase. And then we have updating interrupted, which is interrupted during the cleanup phase. So it's what it's talking about there when they say cleanup phase, they're moving in the back end, once you post the transaction, it's moving it from one table to another table. So if it gets interrupted during that process, it needs to finish the cleanup process. If you have any of those three associated batch recovery statuses, all you need to do is select the batch and click Continue. That'll complete the posting batch process for you. If you see an error, reoccurring error, or single-use error, which is the transaction error edit required, once you select the batch and click Continue, something needs to be done before you can finish posting, all right? So we're going to click Continue. Now we would then need to go back to the window, the origin. I believe it was the journal entry scheme. So we're going to go back here to Financial and then Batches. And we'll see down here that SLSTE batch. All right, so we release the batch from batch recovery to be reposted, so we select the batch. Now the next best thing you can do is click on the edit list. It doesn't matter whether you're in the financial module, the GL module, or the payables module. You'll always, once you have a transaction error, need to print the posting edit list so that you can correct the issue. So we're going to click on the little printer icon and go to Screen. If it's a batch-wide error, it's going to show the error up here. And then if there's an error per transaction, you can see those here. And you can see on these transactions, a currency ID wasn't selected for the posting account that we used in the transaction. So that's why it's coming back here. We would correct this issue, and then we could post the transaction. If we just close this window out and click Post again, it's just going to go back to batch recovery. All right? Anybody have any questions about printing or, batch recovery. All right. So the last two things that I wanted to discuss with you today is performing key inquiries and printing receivables management reports. So we're going to go back to sales in our bottom left corner, and we are going to minimize transactions and increase inquiry, which here is in the bottom. All right, you can see here we have these here are receivables wide. These inquiries down here are for sales order processing. These two here are for the invoicing module. And then here is your customer related information. The two that I focus on normally are transaction by customer and transaction by document. Transaction by customer, if you select the customer ID, you can restrict by document number or document date in this list. You can also remove work, open, or history depending on what you're looking for. Remember, work transactions are receivables transactions entered but not posted. Open transactions are transactions that have been posted but have not had the paid transactional removal process applied to them. And then history is any transactions that the paid transaction removal process has been processed for. All right. And then you can view each document. If you highlight the document and click on document number, it's going to show you the sales transaction entry screen. So here I opened up the sales order processing window view. And then you can click on amount remaining, and that's going to show you the documents that were applied to the invoice, or vice versa, depending on the document type that you're looking at. All right. Seeing here if there's any, here's a credit memo we can look at. So if we click on amount remaining, you can see here, it's reversed the view. It's now showing you the invoices that the credit memo is applied to. Same goes for transaction by document. Here it gives you all the documents within the system. If you know the document number you're looking for, you can search by that. You can also search by document date and customer ID. This gives you a limited number of search criteria. You can only search by one of those, where the by customer reduces the list to the customer, and then you can search on those. And then lastly, we'll talk about reports. There's three reports that I normally use. I use the age trial balance, which will run on aging as of today's date. You always want to do that with options. I look at the historical age trial balance, which we'll go over in a minute. That allows you to run a trial balance from a previous period or previous date. Remember that you need that print historical age trial balance box checked in Receivables to be able to do so. And then there's an analysis report that I like to print every month to make sure all payments were applied to their cash receipts, or the cash receipts payments were applied to invoices. Sorry. So let's look at the trial balances first. Both are in the report trial balance. Here under report type, this is where you're either going to select age trial balance with options or historical age trial balance. So let's look at age trial balance with options. So we'll click on the demo here and click modify. Here you're going to sort by customer ID, you can sort by documents, so by document number, document date, or due date. You can consolidate national account activity if you use national accounts. What account types do you want to print for? Do you want to print for all, open type, or balance forward? And then here you have exclude. So you want to exclude fully paid documents, zero balance documents, no customers that have no activity, unposted applied credit documents, and then multi-currency information. You'll also notice in the top right corner here we have in detail. So this will show us detailed information on the aging. If we just want a summary, we'd uncheck that box. If you're using multi-currency, you identify are you printing this in functional or reporting, and then exchange rate and rate calculation method if you selected reporting. We're going to stay with functional. We'll select a customer here and click Insert. Whenever you're entering a range in here, you need to make sure you click Insert. If this restriction box has nothing written to it, so if it's still plain white, that means you're pulling all customers, all documents, etc. So I'm going to click Insert here. Remember, you can only pick one for each of the range. You can only have a restriction for each of the range types. So customer ID, customer name, class ID, salesperson ID, sales territory ID, short name, state, zip code, phone, and date and type. Type is going to be your user-defined one field. If I were, I can't select, I want customer ID Aaron Fit, and then I also want Aster here. If I did that and I clicked Insert, it would tell me that the range has already been entered. If you have the email functionality set up in your system, you are able to email these trial balances to people. Your destinations are just like before. You can have Word templates if you have the Word template functionality also set up. We'll leave it with standard as is. You can choose screen, printer, file. If you file, you can do text file, tab delimited file, comma delimited, HTML, XML, and I believe if you have a PDF writer installed, you'd also have the option for PDF. Uncheck file. Also, when you're selecting file, you have append or replace. It's important to know the difference. Appending is going to print the data underneath the data that already exists in the file, and replace is going to replace the file. All right. So we'll click OK, and then we can click Print. If I was telling you that you should always print the age trial balance with options instead of the age trial balance, that's because if you choose just age trial balance, all of this exclude information is grayed out, and you don't get to choose what's included and excluded on the aging. So we'll click Print. And here you can see the document, the type, the date, the amount. You can see here's some invoices that were applied to the document, where it's left, the current amount for the document, and then in the agings. Now, if we had done summary, it would have said, I believe, the client name and then what aging bucket the amount was in. So if we uncheck this box, let's print that to screen and show you what a summary view. This is what a summary view looks like. It just has the client and then the amount they owe is 91 and over. It doesn't give you the detail associated with the amount. And then, of course, if you want to print aging for a previous period, you would choose historical age trial balance. That's going to give you the same option as your aged trial balance with options, but you'll also notice this print aging as of date prints, so you can select the date you're printing it as of. If you're using the GL posting date or your document date, and then the account types. The report looks the same, it just allows you to have additional restrictions. And then the last report that I wanted to review with you is the report analysis. So if we go here, you'll see there's multiple reports that are handy. You have accounts due, receivables transaction, receivables sales now analysis, period sales analysis. But I really like this unapplied documents. So if you click here, you click on demo and then modify. It allows you to sort by document type, document number, document date. And then you can pick a range. for the same items that you can sort by. So document type, document number, and document date. And then you can print that to screen so you can see if there's any payments out there that haven't been applied to any invoices. All right. So I'll print this real quick. And you can see here are some debit memos and finance charges and some sales documents that don't have any applied amount information to them. All right, we can see down here for advanced tech satellite, we have a return for $1,016.24 that was never applied to an invoice. So we could apply it to this invoice from January 2014 for $5,718. Are there any questions about reports? John asked, how do I print posting journals if there are if my batches get interrupted? You simply just go to reports and then posting journals. This is where it's kind of important for you to know what your batch ID was. So if you click on demo here, we click modify. Oops. Click on modify here. What are we trying to print? The posting journal, the breakdown registry, the summary breakdown. And then we can go by audit trail code, batch ID, origin, or posting date. I like batch ID and posting date, preferably. And then that way, you know, you could print which batch you want to print quickly. All right, and then that will reprint your posting journals for you. Any other questions about receivables management or the topics that we went over today? All right, I want to remind you that if you would like a CPE certificate for this class that you attended today, you can do so by going to Jeannie, emailing Jeannie Mahoney at jmahoney@brittenford.com. And she'll be happy to print out a CPE certificate for you and send it to you. Remember, that's emailing Jeannie Mahoney at jmahoney@brittenford.com. Thank you, everyone, for attending class today, and I hope to see you in the Accounts Receivable Advanced class.